meditate?
Years ago, as most of you kind of know, it's on the website, I was really ill. At 26, I was very, very ill. And part of my recovery after going through the hospital was going to different healers and different people, and I came across something called pranayama yoga. And so this kind of leveled me out of something in pranayama yoga that just held me long enough to, I don't know what it did, but it just gave me that space. And on the back of the book, when I was reading, called The Lotus and the Rose by Ken Cabral, was an address, Ken Cabral, Chad Road. And I thought, well, I'll go over there and have a look. So I knocked on the door, and this gentleman here, Ken, who I've known for maybe over 30 years.
At least that.
Yeah, at least that. So I was a young man, I wasn't very well at all. And I went over and seen him, and basically he had a class. He come down and he gave me my card and said make an appointment, and I did. And I've been going to Ken for over 30 years consistently, and changed my life and supported me in ways that I could never really express my gratitude. So it's changed my life completely. Got me out of so many scrapes, and for a long time I've been saying to Ken, come and have a chat, Ken, and let's tell people what you do, because people will see Ken for 5-10 years and they still really don't know what he does. So I just thought this might be an insight into what Ken does and how it began and how it might be of interest to you. So we're going to start really from that beginning. So Ken's mum was Yogini Sunita Cabral. And yoga teachers of that era, they used to not just teach yoga and the philosophy, but Sunita had a studio where she would do some massage. And Sunita's couch is actually in Ken's room, so we almost feel that room's sacred. But I guess my first question to Ken is, where did you begin? Where did you begin?
Well, because my mother taught yoga, and I was in industry to start with, and I thought my calling was more towards helping people. And initially, when you go into these fields, you need a qualification. So I picked a college that I worked with remedial massage, which is where my mind was taking, which is London County Society of Physiologists. So I trained there to work with musculoskeletal injuries, people with backs and knees and neck problems, etc., where I worked. And eventually, as I started to work with people, and I use touch all the time, which I'm a firm believer that if you want reassurance to be better, someone has just got to, be close enough to you to help you. I started to get people coming in with physical conditions, and as I started to work with them, there were levels of distress coming out. So instead of feeling pain and discomfort, they were getting memories and flashbacks perhaps of the incident that they had. In the early days, there were people who in industry had fallen off ladders or fallen downstairs, and they'd hurt their shoulder, which was never getting better, or their back. As I started to work on the tissues, memories of what happened started to keep coming back, and as these memories were being released, they were linked to the initial physical problems, and so they were better from then on. Whatever they've tried beforehand, it wasn't necessarily a physical problem, but it was the shock associated with it, which I explored over the years. And as well as working with injuries, I started to develop an interest in flashbacks, which are literally trauma to your system, where something has happened or a series of things happened over your life and you're not quite recovered from them. And I learned to release and develop an approach where you release the shocks to your emotional system tend to stay in your muscle structures and your ligament structures. And by using touch to release, you release whatever the problem is occurring. And if you have the sort of symptoms where over time you've not been right since something's happened to you, and you've tried whatever you can and you get a level of improvement, and that's about as far as you go, you sort of need to understand to a point and take on board emotional shocks to our systems, whether they're one-offs or whether they've happened over childhood or over time, over a period of time, sort of stay in your system. They're explosive forces sometimes, and all the bits, it's a bit like if you drop a glass, it breaks into pieces. If you shatter it forcefully, it breaks into all sorts of pieces and goes all over the place, as you know, and you're finding bits everywhere. Well, with an emotional trauma, all parts of that trauma are embedded in quite a few of these pieces of glasses, and your system can repair it, and you can remember some of what's happened, and you try whatever you can to feel better, but you only hit a block sometimes. The reason for that is that in a lot of the pieces, other parts of what happened are contained in them. So what you were wearing, the age you were, the room you were in, the way it smells, the taste, there's a whole range of sensations that are part of the incidents that's happened. And my work has gone to finding these bits. And like I use shattered glass because
It's a great analogy.
if we shattered something on the floor, how often do you keep finding pieces in places you didn't even know? And that doesn't mean within 10 minutes, so it's like a day or a week or 3 weeks later, you find another fragment. And that's what I do. I find the fragments, and once you apply touch, and it's as simple as that, once you apply touch, it opens up and releases. And from that point, the part of your mind that is part of that mind that's trying to work to repair you actually sort of goes, that's where it is, and immediately latches in and repairs. What then happens is that when you take the memory away or the trauma away, the incident goes back to where it belongs. And so it sort of opens up within you the hope that tomorrow isn't going to be as bad as all the other days that I've had. And that happens automatically. So it's not necessarily a question of giving you suggestions of how to get better. It's once restrictions are lifted, then you start to improve. And that's what I've done. And about maybe 10 years ago, I developed another approach that when you've been in a lot of trouble a lot of time, you have, it affects you, whether it's lack of confidence or insecurity or seeking approval. It's left that mark, and that mark sort of follows you in everyday life. So although it's not the circumstances alone, there are lots of times in our lives where we're hit by people or incidences where you feel the same thing again, and it sort of knocks you back. So there's some part in my mother's book that actually said no one can have more pain and suffering in one life than one constitution can stand. And at one time I read that just quietly to myself, and I sort of said, okay, this is no buts. This is something that I've got to take with no buts, which I did do, but it has to be something that people can relate to. So it had to be parts of us. There's a part of us that can work with this. So if we've got to work and it's part of us, we need to understand it simply. So it has to be something we all do, something we all understand on a simple basis, and that you don't need qualifications for. It's an easy language that we use. So I worked with several things, and I came up with 3 criteria that work for all of us. And the first thing you have to understand when you're doing this, which is the other part of what I do, is you actually separate the circumstances you're under from the effect it's having on you. And this approach targets the effect it's having on you. Once you begin to understand, so something happens to, let's say there's a set of circumstances that keep going on in your head, that you feel unworthy, for instance, at the end of that. And by using this, we can take the unworthy out. The circumstances are still there, but you've taken out that feeling. So you're left with that, and it opens up the part of our lives where you're now able to look at that same thing in so many different ways that you are able to work with it. So your emotions of tolerance and understanding and patience and perception aren't emotions that work to overcome your difficulties, which is what I found. They work to develop and enhance and help you get better. So they won't necessarily combat distress and hold. Their functions are to wait till there's a clear run, and then they can be used to move you forward into being more settled in your life. So that second approach, which I use in conjunction with my work with flashbacks, is to take restrictions away, and it works fairly rapidly. And when you do this on a regular basis, you can reduce whatever you're feeling in the present. Say if you're feeling unsettled, for instance, I know these are a bit of a deeper emotion, you find by doing this procedure within a couple of minutes, that particular emotion will disappear, and whatever it's attached to, whatever you just heard, seen or spoken to, remains, but the emotion is not there with it. So on a simpler basis, if you were angry with something, about someone or something, and we took away the anger, what we're taking away is that anger permanently, and I mean permanently, from what has just made you angry. So what you're left with is the words, but not the anger. And no matter how hard to try and bring the anger back, it doesn't come back. So we're not talking about breathing and relaxing and calming and taking it easy. We're simply taking an emotion out. You're left with whatever. Now deal with it without the anger, and that's the method I would work in, with the direction. But it's so much easier to develop and see ways around something when you're not feeling something that keeps dragging you down all the time. And one of the difficulties that we have when we're dealing with emotions is that we come back to anger. Personally, I always say to people, anger isn't the problem, it's what's made you angry. It's that emotion we're looking for. So anger's easy to move, but why you're angry and what that makes you feel is where it's actually coming from. And so slowly you just lift an emotion. Why it feeds on us constantly is that you can get angry for one thing, let's say, and one of the biggest problems we have is we dwell. And the emotional part of our system is now latching on to whenever you think about this, you get angry. And what dwelling does is it takes the moment that you're angry and, well, let's say 10 minutes later, you're still going on about it and getting angry, but you forget that you've repeated that memory lots and lots of times in that 10 minutes. And once you start to do this, you start the process of this feeling of anger staying with you, because it's not the one thing, it's the dwelling and the repetition that we sort of try to break from what you feel, which is what this does.
I remember the first time I had that treatment with you, and I was about to go on holiday, in a couple of days later, and all you did was work on my stomach, and I had butterflies in my stomach for 2 weeks until I couldn't see you again. And I just thought, that's just quite incredible. And then when I come back, it was almost like you pressed something on my stomach again, and it switched off. And it was almost like it was just, you said to me years ago, you have a map the human system in the body. So you're not just using spoken word like you've just said. Part of it is your observation over, 45 years of the human condition. And you can find these pieces of trauma, shattered glass in the system, and then release it just from the touch. I mean, like sometimes when you touch certain parts, you'll have the memory come up. It's quite bizarre. But it's like saying to someone, well, we've explained it here, you've explained it here to a degree, but what does that meal taste like? And until you've tasted it, you don't really know. All I can say is that you've seen so many people and helped so many people over the years, including me, kind of when I've been on my knees more than once, kind of just level out and get back up. So where did that transition come from over those 40 years to what you do now? So you said 10 years ago, you started to develop another approach, which was, using the words like this feeling of is lifted from you completely. Yes. So that transition, how did it happen?
It happened when, because although I was lifting what caused the problems that you'd had, you were still left with feeling, overwhelmed or unworthy, if you like, is the word I put before. That was still being there, and that wasn't necessarily to do with, part of it was to do with how often that has happened over your life, and part of it to do where other circumstances in our lives where innocently some people have said things to you that have made you feel unworthy. You get very sensitive, and so you almost overreact. So the release from incidences were making you feel better, but we were left with these emotions that were stuck, if you like. And when someone comes to me initially in a consultation, I will say, I don't know what's wrong with you, neither do you. So I can't ask you in a consultation, do you feel that this is happening? Because you don't know, neither do I. Once we start to work and see what it is that neither of us know about, we then start to have a direction. It does come as a surprise to you that how can you just touch? But our bodies are made that we work in a way that we can try and improve it as much as possible. But unfortunately, at times of trauma, the direct link from brain to an injury, say if you've got a knee injury, you know it's a knee injury, and the brain is trying to send messages down to repair. But with trauma, it hasn't got a direct line. It cannot find a direct line to repair. That's because the pieces involved are shattered into different areas.
That's really interesting.
You just have to find where they are. And once they do, everyone doesn't realise why they haven't been able to sort this out. And it's so many people feel so disillusioned with the way that they are because they've tried so many things, and you've put a lot of effort into trying to be okay. Whereas when you are okay, it doesn't require a lot of effort, and it's quite exhausting and quite tiring at a time. So when you come in and I work on you, I take responsibility, and your head takes responsibility, and together we find where it is. All you have to do is explain what you're feeling and when it's releasing, and I know the process has already started for you to get better. And at the end, I would say to someone, now, as you said at the beginning, Stuart said, now you go and explain what's just happened. And all you'll say to people who I don't know, he just touched and this happened. And you see the frown on their faces as you, eventually you don't, they know.
Well, the honest truth is you're the only one in the world who does what he does in this way, because you pioneered this approach, genuinely. So it is completely unique. I mean, I was diagnosed with chronic anxiety when I came to you. I mean, it was 160 milligrams of beta blockers, but touch wood, I've not had any beta blockers for over 20 years. So I know the state I was in, and sometimes even now when the stress gets so much that you've helped me out, and thousands of other people. So how many people would you say you've seen on that couch over the years? How many individual treatments, not people, but how many sessions would you say?
Well, I've done over 40,000 sessions.
That's some experience.
Yeah.
And you've treated every kind of condition. So I was in pain the other day and you've helped me out. And so it's sometimes it's physical pain, anxiety, panic, depression. There's probably not a condition that you can't help. And my question would be then, what part does the kind of mind play in the progress of disease or the contribution to disease, do you think?
I think our systems, we shouldn't have a go at them because they're constantly, it's inbuilt to make you feel better. It's inbuilt to make you cope. It's inbuilt to try and come at things another way, whether it's a physical injury or physical damage, which are long term. And then part of, if I'm working with physical problems that are long term, is to work with someone to say, well, you're going to have to do it this way or that way instead of this, because there's a range of movements, there's a range of positions we move in that, especially when you've come in with an acute condition and you're trying to put a normal life in, and I'm saying to you, well, no, your system doesn't want you to do that because it's telling you it hurts when you do that, and explain, well, just tweak a bit, just do it a different way, come at it a different way. Don't sit in a chair upright if your back is aching. Just find an unorthodox position that you actually gives you a bit of easing for a while, and that's okay for the time that you're working. And although I've talked about the emotional problems, if I've worked with acute physical problems, it has its own range of symptoms. So if you're actually saying I'm in pain, when I start to press and work, we will produce symptoms like red hot pokers, a knife being driven into, putting a lot of weight on, as if your body's moving, if it's going to fall over. They're all shocks, symptoms of pain. Screwdriver going in, driving a nail in. They're ever so strange, but they're the reasons why it's not getting better, because all these
and the emotion,
symptoms.
because sometimes the emotion will come up as well.
Yes.
You know, in exactly the same way as a physical.
Yeah.
problem,
Some type of shock emotions come where your throat goes dry, you start to shake, and you start to shiver a lot, or intense heat. I know then that the spot I'm working on is the source of what that physical problem is. And once we found that source, then improvement literally within moments. You start to feel something's changed, and as time goes on, minutes go on, you start to feel better and better. So those are quite significant points, which is what I look for in improvement. And always I need the feedback from you. You know, I can sometimes say I can find the areas, but only you can tell me what you're actually feeling. I can't feel those things, and once you tell me, then I know where to work.
And you watch the breath as well, don't you? You say
Yes.
the breath is linked with the emotion.
Breath is always important. If I'm watching the abdomen and I'm working on any releases to do with trauma, emotional trauma, is that before you know something is happening, your breathing rate will increase, and I look for that slight increase in your breathing rate, or the slight tremor that's occurring, and then we just wait. Some spots don't deliver straight away. Some take a moment or two, some take 2 or 3, 10, 15, 20 seconds, and then suddenly that breathing rate starts to increase, and then something starts to happen, then it continues to happen, and out it comes as to what we're looking for. And as you said earlier on, you're quite surprised, how can you do that, and all this comes up.
Even now, after all these years, it never ceases to amaze me. You know, really, just how did that come up? Even now, like, you know, the things have come up from years ago that I never even knew. I guess it's down to that analogy of the broken glass.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, but here we are. So if there's anything that you want to add to what you've just said, you know, about trauma and what you do.
Not in the sense that you think, what becomes difficult, what sometimes becomes difficult is, or to comprehend that it's a simple procedure that doesn't change. So that whatever's happened into your life where you've not been right since something has happened to you, roughly. And it's just a simple procedure. Remember that each of you that come in will have had different circumstances that have occurred, but the effect to release it is exactly the same. And so we're working on locating the shock to your system. If we're working on using the approach to separate your emotion, now if we take anger for instance, it's easy to understand. Is that what makes me angry doesn't make you angry, and whatever you have, different ages, different walks of life, different times, the emotions remain the same. So we work on the constants. It's as simple as that. So if I'm looking for trauma in your system, I work on a constant, which is using my thumb and looking for what it is. No matter who you are, where it's come from, that is the constant. And with a narcissist, you're tapping into the parts of our system that work with constants all the time to try and repair, because it's the only way it can do it, because we all go through our different ways of life with the same emotions. So what this has to have a constant to deal with whatever goes on. Once it goes astray, then we're in problems. You know, simply if you walk down a corridor, it's working on a constant to take you down. If you trip and fall in that corridor, well, you've come out of it. So whatever happens after that, you know, we wait and see. So I always work with a constant. So that's how this improv. I'm tapping into the bits of you, the parts of you that work on a constant. You know, so your emotional system. If you're angry about something, will automatically set the anger out because you dwell and repeat it. So you constantly feel anger. If I constantly take an anger out, but the same thing each time until the anger lessens, your emotional system then starts to work that think through that you're not angry when you say this, so it stops being angry. Now you're left with, well, what do we do? He or she's still thinking this, but they're not angry. It allows other emotions to come in to start to work, to reason through, to understand where you're coming. This is a non-judgmental approach, and at all times, whatever has happened to you, whoever's done it, in whichever way it's happened, my concentration is to make sure you're okay, regardless. And that's what we work. That's what I work with.
Well, you know what, Ken? It comes highly recommended by me and thousands of other people. So you're in Birmingham Holistic. You haven't got a website. You're on our website, but do you want to give your phone number? Do you know your phone number?
Yes, it's 0121 459 4138. That's an old-fashioned landline, which I still have.
And there's not a condition I don't think wouldn't benefit from Ken. So I would honestly, genuinely recommend Ken. That's the truth of it. Anyway, thanks very much, Ken, for your time. I do appreciate that. And thank you very much, folks. Thank you.